United States Olympic Committee Training Design Symposium 2007, Part 1. Bill Sands, Ph.D., Recovery. This original video was an hour, 20 minutes, and these are notes describing a lecture by Bill Sands about recovery. Restoration, recuperation, to return what was lost. Decompression, fatigue reduction, prevention of overtraining. Relax more effectively, not about rehabilitation. What is recovery? 3 types, that is passive, active, and proactive. West is more curative, East is more preventative. Levels, categories could be long-headed. Athletes have long complained about declining performances that don't make sense, lack of progress, maybe no decline, but lack of improvement, feelings of being overtired, lots of negative emotions, no desire to train, inability to recover, don't seem to get resurrected. The problem, under recovery, exacerbated by increased competitions, athletes expected to compete year-round, training loads have increased, more is better mentality, early specialization, decrease in multilateral development, that is can't skip, hop, jump, etc. Coaches have to win now because of parents, sponsors, and athletes. Train harder but benefit less equals training too much. Under recovery equals overtraining. Very little prep time with regard to peaking, that is too many competitions. Train through competitions is a mistake. Periodization does not work with current amount of competitions. Causes of under recovery. Monotonous training, greater than 3 hours per day. Greater than 30% training increase per week. Ignoring hard, easy principle. Vast majority of training on rest days. He gives an example of saying one coach ran every day for 15 years, even when he was sick. High stimulus days make you better. Too many high stimulus days is no good. Equals low production long term. No rest days. 100% effort every single day. Culture doesn't allow rest. Again, those were causes of under recovery. Attacking the problem. Definitional nightmare because dual or more labels. Premature and poor definitions lead to confusion. Many markers or many terms for overtraining. And he gives examples of words from the past and their definitions. Drapetomania and dysesthesia. I can't really pronounce it. Are examples of diagnosis not being diseases, escaping from slavery and refusing to work on plantations. Again, the example is to suggest that premature or poor definitions lead to confusion, and because of the many, poor definitions and premature definitions for overtraining, it's very hard to describe it. Many contradictions in definitions, symptoms of overtraining. Diagnosis without clear definitions is dangerous. Syndrome of being tired is what he calls it. Again, these were examples of attacking the problem. Can we describe it? And this would be describing definitional terms for overtraining or under recovery. Decreased performance after increase in productive training and or delayed recovery. Intolerance to training. Biological phenomenon. Under recovery precedes overtraining. And that was, can we describe what overtraining or under recovery is? A model of under recovery. Search for markers may be long-headed. Predisposing factors are a lot of factors, and all athletes are not equal, nor durable. Enabling factors. Reinforcing factors. Keep doing enabling factors leads to under recovery or overtraining. Need all 3 for a model. That is, predisposing factors, enabling factors, and reinforcing factors. Image of overtraining. Sand's example of mountain, then avalanche, akin to training and more training. In other words, there's a mountain of snow or sand, and as soon as a snowball or a sand grain starts to fall, and it sort of, creates an avalanche or snowballs, if you will. Example may depend on amount and speed of accumulation of sand or training or snow. So it's an image so that you can see how overtraining actually can gradually build up and then almost be irreversible. Surfacing of submarine analogy. Again, this is another image, if you can kind of think of what I'm saying as I'm saying it. Submarine surfaces, which indicates overtraining. So imagine a wave pattern of water, and then on the lowest level, the submarine surfaces, which indicates overtraining. If you can kind of have a vision of that. Bigger differences, decreases submarine surfacing. Planning is the key. So when there's a huge wave, the submarine actually can't go through the wave, and that would be an example of the bigger differences, decreases submarine surfaces. And then, of course, planning when you have your training at higher or lower volumes is always going to increase your performance and or your peak. 3 areas of recovery. Pedagogical, carefully periodized program. Medical, biological, physical, that is massage, stretching, sauna, etc. Pharmacological, illegal, i.e. EPO, steroids, drugs that are not necessarily going to benefit the health, but they may actually increase or, illegally performance enhancing scenarios. Nutrition, which is the most researched. Psychological, visualization, guided imagery, autosuggestion, hypnosis, music. Earliest detection of overtraining may be psychological and less so in physiological realm. And so those are all areas of recovery that would, assist athletes in recovery along with their training. Again, just to review, pedagogical, biological, and psychological. Pharmacological isn't one of the 3 areas of recovery because that's actually illegal. Preventative versus curative. East, meaning the Far East on the other side of the world, is more preventative. West, meaning the USA, more curative. Different philosophy may help hurt overtraining. So depending on how you use recovery and how you use your training plans and how you are establishing what you're doing, you're going to have one philosophy versus the other. And the Western philosophy may actually be too late because it's curative. It's, actually after the person's overtrained or hurt or whatever, whereas the East is more preventative. So they're doing these things prior to training, during training, and after training. So it's a part of their training plan. Lesson of Goldilocks. Some porridge was too hot or too cold, too soft, too hard, or just right. Training is an optimization issue. That is too much, too little, or just right. So the lesson of Goldilocks is it needs to be just right in order for athletes not to be overtrained, undertrained. They need to be optimally trained or just right. General adaptation syndrome, which is by Selye, similar to training adaptation syndrome. And the model suggests that train, rest, supercompensate, which is very similar to Selye's alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. That is his general adaptation syndrome, the latter, and train, rest, supercompensation is the training adaptation syndrome. Basically the same ideas. They're both triphasic, which means they've got 3 different parts. West, general adaptation syndrome, or training adaptation syndrome. West, overreach, supercompensate, overtrain. East, acquisition of athletic training, stabilization of athletic form, loss of athletic form. Again, those are all examples of adaptations of Selye's original general adaptation syndrome. They are all triphasic, and if we pay attention to those while we're training our athletes, we should never get to the last phase, which is going in order from Selye to west to east. Exhaustion, overtraining, or loss of athletic form. Not understanding the essential general adaptation syndrome, though, will get you in that last column there. Enhancing recovery should increase supercompensation if training loads are hard enough and rest recovery is concentrated. Fitness and fatigue. This is a Medvedev model. Increase, 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 decrease training load in stair-step fashion or progressively. So imagine going upstairs, 1, 2, 3. 3 would be the highest point, and then dropping back down to like 1 or 2.5. So you climb up, then you go down, and you just keep doing that over the course of the season. And that would be an example of climbing a ladder, ascending, and an interplay of the fitness fatigue to achieve peak performance. Summated microcycles, and that suggests that they're eventually progressing forward, but there's always going to be a recovery built into the training phases. So again, using that model of 1, 2, 3, 1.5, or 2, then you would continue with that cycle 2, 3, 4, 2.5, 3. So you're ascending and you're climbing, but that third or fourth week you're always going to have a recovery cycle built in there. Mike Stone agrees, but revises the order of the microcycle. So he does a reverse periodization model, which is 4, 3, 2, and he goes back up to 3.5, 3. Then he goes 3, 2, 1. I'm just using those numbers so it makes sense. But the bottom line is he reverses the periodization model. So he starts off with the higher load and then descends. And then he has a recovery week, and then he starts at the top again. Then he descends all the way down. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. Climbing down or descending would be the example of Mike Stone's reverse periodization, and a lot of the Russians actually did that too, if you study periodization models. Monitoring. Systematic monitoring of path or plan. Create baseline to detect anomalies or develop. Coaches need to focus on single subject versus group. That is, sports scientists, because it is less significant if group improves versus your best athlete. Very difficult to get a single subject data published, but less important for coaches. So the idea there is we're not necessarily sports scientists in as much as we're not really trying to publish a paper and get it put in someone's scientific journal. More or less, we're trying to improve our team of athletes. So a lot of the scientific measurements may or may not necessarily be utilized because we're trying to get 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 people at their highest level, or however big your team is. The idea behind putting information in scientific journals is they have a lot of rules and stipulations on what can and what cannot be done. Coaches don't need to have those rules. Our goal is to make our team or athlete better, and that's, I guess, is the point of that last statement there. Examples of monitoring: recovery cue, drop jump test, rest cue, POMS or POMS, glutamine glutamate, orthostatic intolerance. So those are all examples of ways in which you could monitor your training to see how much your athletes are getting in shape or out of shape, how your athletes are feeling. The drop jump test actually measures power. So if you do that, let's say 4 or 5 times a year, you'll be able to see if there have been any changes with the athlete's power, or if you really are paying attention and you periodize your training plans during one of your high volume weeks or months, you could do the drop test. If you did that, over the course of the year, low volume, high volume, low intensity, high intensity. Now you'd have some type of comparison to see how much athletes are gaining or losing. And you could do that with just about any kind of measurement, but these are tests and examples of monitoring that sports scientists have used over the last, let's say, 15 or 20 years. Again, recovery cue, drop jump test, rest cue, POMS, POMS, glutamine, glutamate, orthostatic intolerance. I actually used the rest cue and the recovery cue when I learned about it, I want to say about 10 years ago, and those two measurements actually give the athletes the information so they start to become aware of how they're feeling before and after training and how they're feeling over the course of a month and then how they're feeling over the course of a year in terms of measuring psychological data and what they're eating and what they're putting into their bodies and how they over the course of the year they're able to actually those are examples of mining that they're actually able to use over the course of the year.